In 1987, London's affluent Knightsbridge area was the scene of an armed raid so spectacular it entered the criminal record books as one of the biggest heists of the century.
No other robbery in this country has come close to it.
It was a colossal job.
A staggering £40 million worth of valuables were stolen when a ruthless Italian robber smashed his way into hundreds of safety deposit boxes,
making it Britain's biggest robbery.
The Italian playboy, the Italian, he was playing around with the girls. He liked the flash cars.
Make sure everything runs smoothly.
The plan was cunning and its execution fearless. So how did he do it? This is the incredible story of the Knightsbridge safety deposit box raid. Security Deposits plc, located in one of London's wealthiest areas, was a safe haven for the very rich.
Knightsbridge is a hugely expensive area. A lot of foreigners live in the service flats around that area. Harrods dominates the street because it's one of the most expensive department stores in the world. Lots of foreign tourists there. Always a very busy area, expensive cafes, nice restaurants, very fashionable streets. There could be an awful lot of money, jewellery, stocks and shares, all sorts of things deposited there. So if you lived in the area and you had a safe deposit box, that's the sort of place you would go to keep your valuables.
The best in Britain. That's how the owners described the Knightsbridge Safe Deposit Centre when the doors were opened for the first time just 4 years.
Located in a district where the fabulously wealthy lived, worked and played, Security Deposits had customers on its doorstep and from around the world. They came to store their treasures in one of the 4,000 boxes housed in a solid vault at its centre.
You go into the front entrance and there you have a reception, the manager and his staff, and you want a box, you give details. People were keeping monies for whatever reason, documents for whatever reasons, jewellery for whatever reasons, even drugs and firearms for whatever reasons in deposit boxes. And the rental per annum is not a lot of money.
Sunday, the 12th of July, 1987. Parvez Latif, the owner and manager of Security Deposits, was waiting for 2 potential clients to arrive.
They had appointment as prospective customers who were dressed as respectable businessmen, had an appointment with Parvez Latif, the manager. He let them in. They then went downstairs into the vault area.
As Latif was showing the men the facilities, the mood suddenly changed when one of them pulled a gun.
When someone is forced to do something by another person and through fear they will cooperate. He's now under control.
With a gun to his back, Latif was forced into the security control room.
The manager, Latif, took them down there. Viccei was then able to get into the control room. He grabbed the guard there. The guard couldn't press an alarm, which was an internal alarm anyway. He locked them away in the ante-room, handcuffed them. He now had control down there.
Their terrifying ordeal was about to get much worse.
He went back upstairs, and then he waited for the other guard and just held him at gunpoint. The guards were petrified. You've been manhandled and you've had firearms in your face.
The gang of armed robbers, led by a man called Valerio Viccei, had overcome the owner and 2 security guards in a matter of minutes. They were locked in a separate room. The fortress, holding millions of pounds worth of valuables, was now at the mercy of the robbers.
Viccei was in control. He was quite very determined. He knew what he wanted, what he was going to do. He knew he was limited on the time.
And time was now a crucial factor. Regular customers could enter the premises at any moment and disrupt the gang's plan. But Viccei was a step ahead. An accomplice was posted in front of the building, waiting for his cue.
Locked the front door, put a notice on that they regret apologies because there was either building work or whatever was being done. They now controlled the building.
The deposit box center was now secured. Thousands of boxes holding cash and valuables lay inside. With everyone in position, the gang sealed the center and put their plan into action. The security deposit boxes were housed in a solid steel vault in the building's basement. There were 4,000 boxes in the room, but only 800 were in use, holding anything from deeds and bonds to cash and jewelry.
He knew he was limited on the time. He had an hour and a half to break open the boxes. He's running to time.
The gang grabbed their final accomplice from outside and began their raid. They had to finish before the center supervisor came to check on the premises.
Was banging at the boxes, the other was right behind him. And then the other two were sweeping up. Rings and jewellery boxes. Yeah, they broke down everything they could. That's what the other two were there for, and sorting out. It was like a shuffling behind, and they would break up, bang, bang. Anything bulky, yeah, they'd get rid of.
Although the containers were made of thick steel, box after box was smashed open. Those that were in use had different colors on the locks, so the gang knew which to target. They wasted no time nabbing the contents.
They were then scooping up and putting the gear, sorting out the big boxes, so you're minimalising the packaging and just pouring in whatever you've got, jewellery, gold, Kruger hands, notes and everything, just pouring it into the big boss bags, take them out.
There could be an awful lot of money, jewellery, stocks and shares, all sorts of things deposited there.
As the villains ransacked the vault, the staff were forced to sit and listen to the chaos. The thieves worked tirelessly for over an hour, bagging up everything they could get their hands on. But time was running out. The center supervisor was due any minute.
He was ready to go. That's the professionalism of it. You see the films, don't you? You see the stories on the TV where they go, no, we've got to have one more, and he's trying to grab the last pound note, the last bit of jewellery, and then they drive off and he's left stranded. You know, that's just maybe film, the way films work. But no, this guy was professional. You know, you look, bang, you do as you're told, off we go, and that's it.
They must have realised that they couldn't really spend all night there. Other staff were going to turn up. People were going to want to put stuff in the safe deposits on Sunday night or on Monday morning.
The robbers lugged their bags of loot out of the vault. Then they made sure the last member of staff wouldn't cause them any grief.
He was ready for 5 o'clock for the guard to come in, who was going to lock the vault, and the time lock was going to be placed on. When the guard knocked on the back door to be allowed in, he then apprehended him at gunpoint as well and left.
The vault was a mess. The gang had been relentless in their raid, smashing their way through a box every 30 seconds. Now, as the staff sat helpless, the villains fled into the busy streets of London with no sign of the police.
Eventually, police were called. There was a horrendous scene of crime as such, because 121 boxes, deposit boxes, had been broken open. There was property throughout the vault, discarded property.
As the hunt got underway, Viccei put the next stage of his plan into action. The team split up and he went off alone. Meanwhile, the police began the painstaking task of investigating the crime.
In a very minute way, steadily, basically foot by foot. And it took 8 days to examine the vault. What we did realise after some time, but it wasn't the sort of faces that we thought could be responsible.
These weren't the familiar suspects from any of the big London armed robbery gangs.
No information was coming from other police officers. No other information was coming from police informants.
Scotland Yard had little to go on, and Viccei thought he was home and dry. For him, it had been a very good payday. As the days turned into weeks, the pressure on Scotland Yard mounted. Figures leaked to the media about the size of the haul were rising fast,
£40 million.
but they still had few leads. One of the challenges for officers was tracing all the victims affected.
Your victims of crime have to be seen, in this case, 100 and whatever losers, so I want identification of property.
A problem for detectives is that some customers are unlikely to tell them what's missing or how much it's worth.
I've lost all my jewellery except for what I'm wearing today.
Of the 121 box holders, I think that we traced about 109. That leaves 12 box holders that you must wonder why they've not come forward.
Some owners never went to the police, so nobody has any idea what was in those boxes.
As the investigation continued, the scale of the robbery became apparent. It was quickly becoming Britain's largest ever heist.
The rumours began to swirl about the amount of money or the amount of material that might have gone.
Yesterday evening, shocked customers gathered outside the centre. Some had lost everything.
The amount began to mount. Police began to talk about £5 million.
More than £10 million in valuables.
So it just began to creep up. Once people realised what could be held in safe deposit boxes, there began a lot of speculation.
The true value of the raid may never be known.
As media interest in the investigation grew, Scotland Yard finally got a much-needed breakthrough.
We found a fingerprint in blood. Well, that's when it breaks, doesn't it? Bang.
The Metropolitan Police were in the midst of tackling one of the biggest robberies in British history. An audacious gang had ransacked an exclusive safety deposit box centre in Knightsbridge, fleeing with millions of pounds worth of loot. Pressure was building on Scotland Yard to catch the culprits. After a fingertip search of the crime scene, the police got their first breakthrough.
Turning point in the case is quite simple in itself, is that it was the fingerprint.
Officers may have had a fingerprint, but matching it to a suspect was a different matter. Meanwhile, efforts were concentrated on determining what had happened, with the help of the centre's owner, Parvez Latif.
Tag it, flag it, yeah, make sure it's absolutely recorded properly. Yeah, okay.
He bought the safe deposit company about a year earlier.
Latif's lifestyle as such was that he was using coke, he was in love with his girlfriend Pamela Seamarks, he wanted to marry her.
The police began looking into Latif's personal life, while he assisted them with their inquiries.
We even did a video construction with him involved in it. Show us exactly what happened.
As officers built a profile of Latif and pieced together the robbery, vital information on the fingerprint finally came through.
Fingerprint comparisons were not automated. It had to be done by visual observation, and it took them weeks to go through a huge card index and a huge collection of fingerprints. Then the penny dropped. And they realised who they were looking for.
The fingerprint was then sent to New Scotland Yard, where it was eventually identified as belonging to Valerio Viccei. We were very fortunate that his fingerprints were in the indexes there. They'd been sent over by the Italian authorities in 1986 because they wanted Viccei for major crimes in Italy. They believed he was in England. These people that you're dealing with are top class.
Idea, Leach?
We had no idea who it was.
Valerio Viccei was a rather unique criminal. Flash, brash, and with good looks to boot. He had Italian charm, charisma, and a playboy lifestyle. He liked beautiful women, fast cars, and money in his pocket. Lots of money.
He had obviously quite a bit of money from the robberies because he lived a very good life and was quite a high roller, which means he must have made a lot of money.
It wasn't just them. I mean, the money helped because he wanted a playboy lifestyle. But it wasn't his main motivation. His main motivation was he got such a kick out of it.
wall-to-wall women, cocaine and cars. And that sums him up. And there are lots of people who have been tremendous characters, very powerful, very clever, very ruthless. Viccei was something slightly different to all of that, something rather extravagant. Viccei was a Jack the Lad in a big way. I can't think of a criminal quite like him in any of the other cases that I've done.
Viccei was no stranger to luxury. He came from a privileged background in Italy.
His father was a libel lawyer and his mother ran a boutique. He went to university. I mean, he was well educated.
But his respectable upbringing had done nothing to curb his thirst for crime. Viccei may have been unknown to the British authorities, but his face was very familiar to Italian police. Detective Inspector Leach discovered that Valerio Viccei was an accomplished thief, wanted in his home country for over 50 robberies, all by the age of 32.
They knew him very well there. And he got away with blue murder. And even when he was arrested for different offences, the system in Italy is very, I wouldn't say bizarre, but we had a job understanding it, but there's so many bail proceedings. He was just arrogant, and he's in their face all the time.
He was the number one, he was the top of his profession, and that's the world they live in.
The police had a job on their hands. A ruthless Italian playboy was their number one suspect, and he was a slippery customer. D.I. Leach set to work finding out more about this elusive character.
High class, high quality. He's got the briefcase, Louis Vuitton, whatever it is, Rolex watch and so on. You know, he knows his way around, you know, that's his lifestyle.
Viccei was arrogant, he was extrovert, great womanizer.
As they built a profile of their suspect, officers realized they were dealing with a chancer who'd already had more than a few close scrapes with the law.
The Italian police tracked him down to London and asked Scotland Yard to arrest him. 2 officers stopped his car, not knowing very much about his background. And Viccei said, "Oh, I'd better just turn off my car telephone." Got out the other side and ran off down the street and disappeared again. He's very, very ready for the chase, ready to get away. Very alert, quick thinking.
Viccei was used to giving the police the slip.
Because we didn't find him at all, we found everybody else because he was in and out of the country. And that's where, again, your manpower comes into it because you now need surveillance teams, surveillance equipment, things to focus on addresses and so on. We then went to work on those associates, not knowing whether they were involved in the crime or not. And all their vehicles and whatever details we had about them, where they were working. And then you get the breaks.
Surveillance flagged up some interesting characters associated with Viccei. Eric Rubin, known to the police with previous minor convictions. Stephen Mann, a wild card, no criminal background, but closely linked to Viccei. Peter O'Donoghue, mixed in the same social circles as the Italian charmer. David Poole, not only linked to Viccei, but also seen frequenting certain places of interest to the police. And Israel Pincus, who officers were keeping an eye on, and who would inadvertently lead them to their next major breakthrough.
Pincus's car was identified as being at White's Hotel. He got a parking ticket, because we'd put that on the computer.
Nobody had a fixed address for Viccei, but they knew of his associates, and the police began to look at the associates, the people around him, and that led them slowly towards where he might be.
All the suspects, all the people that Italy had said, look, he knows Viccei's associate of O'Donoghue, Paul and Pincus. We started working on them, found out where they were living or their movements.
And these inquiries paid off. Just weeks into the investigation, the flying squad got their next lead.
The surveillance teams had looked at a Ferrari Testarossa. This was the vehicle that Viccei was using. It then figured, then we seen Pincus's car, then you see the Ferrari. Then it linked it up.
London, 1987. Scotland Yard had one of the biggest robberies in criminal history on its hands. An Italian career criminal had raided a vault of safety deposit boxes and fled with a wealth of valuables. As information poured in, the police realized the stolen loot was worth tens of millions of pounds. Yet almost a month after the robbery, their #1 suspect, Valerio Viccei, was still giving officers the slip. But how much longer could he elude them? The flying squad were now hot on his heels and had tracked him to a London hotel.
We actually found out that they'd been using whites.
Yes, it's Mr. Viccei.
The day I spoke to the manager there, he said, well, Viccei's been here today, he's gone, but he was meeting a Mr. Paul.
Officers were getting close to their #1 suspect. By now, the value of goods stolen stood at a staggering £40 million, and Viccei was the country's #1 fugitive. All Detective Inspector Leach could do was pray he'd surface again. Then Leach got the call he'd been waiting for.
I went to New Scotland Yard to put things together, and then I got a phone call again saying, oh, Viccei's just walked into White's Hotel.
Hello, could I speak to DR Leach, please?
I said, oh, he's just arrived, you know, so bang.
As soon as I can, thank you.
It was the turning point officers needed.
We knew Viccei was the man. That was the first time we'd actually had a sighting of him.
He'd been staying at a hotel in West London, I think it was White's, and they began to watch that, and there he was with his big Ferrari, which he was about to export.
But just as Viccei came within touching distance, he vanished again, speeding off through the capital in his sports car.
Viccei was just coming out of the hotel and just got into the Ferrari and then drove off down the Bayswater Road towards Marble Arch.
The police weren't about to let him slip away. They gave chase.
At the end of the day, yeah, he's a big fish. You've got to catch him. And that's when we gave the order to take him out. The Ferrari was in traffic going towards the Marble Arch. It's a very difficult thing trying to take someone out of a car. He was blocked in. The traffic was building up Bayswater. But you don't want to chase with a Ferrari Testarossa anywhere, do you? The order was given, and at the appropriate time, they pulled him out.
Got him, Gov. Valerio Viccei, my name's Pete. From the flying squad.
Viccei was a showman. He had 2 Ferraris, and the reason he was caught was because he was waiting to send his second and favourite Ferrari to Colombia, which is where he was going to go to. If he hadn't been so ridiculously vain and greedy, they would not have caught him. They rammed his car, which must have been a very painful moment for a man who stayed in Britain long enough to want to export this thing. It was an £84,000 Ferrari, I seem to remember. So, but they didn't have much choice. I mean, there's a guy who they knew was normally armed.
A quick search of Viccei's precious vehicle revealed some clear signs that he had been living the life of Riley.
A lot of the stuff that was in his briefcase, in the car, he had a lot of that still with him. I mean, top-class jewellery.
The flying squad finally had their man, along with some incriminating evidence. Viccei's fingerprint placed him firmly at the scene of the crime, and his track record proved he was a professional thief with a string of robberies to his name. But was he prepared to talk to the police?
Valerio Viccei did not implicate anyone else in the robbery. It didn't mention any names. We found him with immense amount of property and so on, and it followed. He knew what was going to happen, so he took the blame on himself.
Viccei claimed to be a one-man band, but the police knew there was more to the story.
The ball started rolling because then we had to then start hitting all the others because we now realised, you know, a lot of work had been done.
Officers wasted no time arresting Viccei's associates. They'd put their necks on the line to pull off Viccei's dream job, but didn't appear to be big-time players themselves. So what was their motive?
They got 100,000 each in the split, and the possibility of getting more later.
Do you know Mr. Eric Rubin at all?
As the flying squad grilled the other culprits, they quickly discovered Viccei was one of a kind, an intelligent thief who'd effectively evaded justice for years. But how had he robbed the Knightsbridge security centre without raising any alarms?
It was clear that the robbers had to have known, for example, that the closed-circuit television wasn't functioning, that there would be very few staff around on a Sunday afternoon, that it was very easy to bring a car or a van up to the back to load stuff in, that there were no parking restrictions on Sunday afternoon then, I don't think, that CCTV didn't exist in the streets around then, which of course it didn't in the 1980s. So somebody had to not only case the place, I visited it and looked around, but also had a good idea of how the place worked.
Viccei was claiming no one else was involved, but this kind of detail had to come from somewhere.
The fact that he'd been there a number of times, and then because their records weren't that good there, the video cameras didn't work. It was so slack there. It was possible that he had recognised the faults in the security there by just visiting. But we did suspect Latif, but no, it just seemed too big.
As suspicions surrounding Latif grew, one of Viccei's associates, Stephen Mann, broke.
Stephen Mann was not a criminal in the true sense. Once he realised that, main man's arrested and so on, and he then just put his hands up.
So what is your relationship with Mr. Viccei?
And he decided that he would give evidence for us against the others, particularly Viccei.
Mann rolled over, telling the police what had happened after the robbery.
He went up to Brownlow Court, where the garage was at the rear of a block of flats, and he met Stephen Mann there. They then changed boxed up what they could and changed it into whatever, so it was manageable. Then went to a flat in North London.
As the revelations poured in, Mann alleged that there was more than just one member of the Viccei family involved.
Stephen Mann said Viccei's father was waiting for him. We didn't have any corroboration on that.
We were aware that the father was in this country, yes. And I do think there was a reference to the fact that the father had been at the flat that Viccei was using.
As rumours circulated that Viccei hadn't worked alone and had enjoyed his newfound wealth with his father, the police got a breakthrough with the centre owner, Latif, from one of Viccei's other associates.
We went through Pincus's stuff. We found telephone bills from Israel to the centre.
Before his arrest, Viccei had eluded the police and fled to Israel. But why would he have been calling the security centre?
That's when we realised that Latif was involved.
Scotland Yard was facing one of Britain's biggest heists ever. £40 million worth of valuables had been stolen by an Italian armed robber. After weeks of surveillance, officers had their number one suspect, Valerio Viccei, in custody. Viccei was claiming no one else was involved, but his associates were telling a different tale. And the police were about to uncover exactly how the whole operation was possible.
So you arrested Latif. What he said to us was, well, it's a relief. I'm now going to tell you all about it. I want to cooperate. And basically, he was saying that Viccei had forced him to do it. And that was going to be his defence.
The security centre owner, Parvez Latif, had lied. His alibi crumbled when police discovered Viccei had been calling him regularly from abroad to check on the investigation.
Latif was a very good target. He'd reduced the cost of the premiums for customers and still couldn't get any business. At the time of the robbery, I think they had 800 boxes in use out of 4,000. Latif was getting desperate. He'd already lost £500,000. Although he came from a wealthy Pakistani family, he lived quite a flash life, which he had to sustain. Other people, I think, were scared of Viccei, which might explain the power and the hold he had over people like Latif.
The business was not being run properly as such. It was going down the pan. He owed money. Viccei had promised him a third of the proceeds.
To make matters worse, Latif was about to find out that it wasn't only his business Viccei had stolen.
Viccei had an affair with Latif's girlfriend.
That was all to do with his ego and a bit on the side as such. He could do it. He could prove that I could take her away from Latif. It was as easy as that. Yeah, he used her for a while. I don't think he was too bothered about her.
As the revelations continued, the elaborate details of Viccei's plan finally came to light.
Knightsbridge was opportunist because he met Latif and he became the inside agent and he wined and dined him. You know, I'd say the modern expression now is he groomed him, you know.
Viccei had his sights on the prize the moment he was told about the centre by a Russian acquaintance. Latif was just a pawn in his game. Viccei was meticulous in his planning. He spent months meeting Latif, offering him bribes as a sweetener until he had him on side. Viccei also rented his own box at the centre to gain entry and check out the security.
And this company, despite the fact where it was in the middle of Knightsbridge, a great temptation for rich people to put their stuff away safely, wasn't doing well. Enter Viccei, who is swaggering. You can imagine how effective he would have been in dominating Latif. He persuaded Latif, I think, to put up his insurance premiums and put his own guns and money into the safe deposit box about 2 months before the actual robbery. So again, it was a good way of getting to look round the place. And Latif, very obligingly, didn't take down his name and address or ask for any proof of identity. Very dangerous thing to do in the circumstances.
These discrepancies allowed Viccei free rein to plot his perfect crime. Day in, day out, he sat going over his plan in minute detail, covering every eventuality.
One mustn't lose sight of Viccei. He planned. He planned his robberies. You would expect that. It took time, Knightsbridge, let alone to time it the way that he did time it, although it didn't work out for him exactly on the day. The vehicles that were bought, the different premises that were used.
They've looked at the place they're going to rob. They've seen how people go past it. They've watched the routines of people who work there. So they know that to a second the time that they've got.
But on the day, not everything went according to Viccei's meticulous plan. The first mistake came when he tried to call the gang member posing as a security guard outside.
He was wandering around out the front. Tried to call him.
Lead it to 4, come in.
Wasn't paying attention. Let's say they didn't communicate.
Despite hours of planning, the fake guard had made a rookie error. The volume on his radio was turned down.
Viccei couldn't believe it. Slapped him a few times. I wasn't listening to the radio.
And the mistakes didn't stop there. Before the raid could begin, Viccei called for his final accomplice, also outside.
He wanted the van, and he couldn't get a response. He had to leave the vault. He goes out and then bumps into a uniformed police officer.
Viccei could have been rumbled before he'd even begun, but he made a split-second decision.
You know, he just had to front it up, but, you know, other people might have panicked. They were so lackadaisical, you know, and casual about it, and that's why they made mistakes. By the time they got back, the police by then had disappeared because the police had been there for totally different reasons. That's your luck sometimes, you know.
But luck wasn't all on Viccei's side. The police were about to learn exactly how his bloodstained fingerprint ended up in the vault.
the boxes. They did need banging, they really did need some hitting. Then you've got to pull them out, and that's why when they were rushing, that's why he cut his finger. Quite a deep cut.
If Viccei had not cut his finger on the lock of one of the safe deposit boxes, he probably would have got away with it.
It was this simple error by Viccei himself that eventually led the police straight to him. Officers also discovered how the gang had managed to smash open the steel security boxes.
You're presented with a box. If you haven't got a key, you've got to force it open. It's as easy as that. And he made a tool. They had to hit the lock in a certain way to break it in one. I mean, if you're spending, 5 minutes breaking one box, another 5 minutes, another. It's like the films. It's a dream, isn't it? You're in a deposit box and you've got hours, and you can just break them all open at willy-nilly and select what you want.
They may have managed to break open the boxes, but the gang's raid was flawed in many ways. Along with his own slip-ups, the crew Viccei selected were also to blame for his downfall.
He playing what he thought was meticulous, but because it's up to the players on the day. And he knew that they were a liability, maybe. If they'd had their radios tuned in and they just were half awake, then he wouldn't have had the delays and so on.
Mr. Parvez Latif.
As well as their errors during the robbery, some of Viccei's associates were quick to roll over once the police came knocking.
Everybody has to look after themselves. Viccei looked after himself in certain respects. But that's what happens in these cases, where you have a number of defendants, suddenly dog eats dog.
As officers questioned suspects and built the case, the revelations kept coming.
4 days he spent sorting out all the gear, dividing up into whatever. The watches, the stones, and all the money went into the bath, which he says was about £1 million.
True to his Playboy image, Viccei spent days reveling in his newly acquired wealth. But he also slipped up once he had the goods in his possession.
We got a lot of property back. We found different deposit boxes with watches, stones, etc., etc. He's got his firearms back.
Despite his carelessness, he wasted no time cashing in his spoils, selling items around the world.
He was travelling in and out of Europe. He went to Switzerland to broker the deal for the diamonds. He then went to Antwerp, Belgium, and then he met people there that introduced him to the Israelis.
He obviously had travelled a lot, and he obviously knew the byways of Europe, where you could get rid of diamonds, places like Antwerp, where you could move money easily. And he'd been involved with the drug world then, and now is a very good way of transporting stuff and building up connections as well.
And this wasn't Viccei's first job in the UK. He'd been a busy man since arriving on our shores just 18 months previously. Detectives discovered he was responsible for at least 5 other armed robberies in London, netting him over £250,000. These helped fund work on the Knightsbridge job. One raid had taken place at the illustrious Coutts Bank just months before.
Because they're dressed in motorcycle helmets. Viccei's got his Beretta waving it around. All the customers sitting on the floor, hands up and so on, terrified. He got £26,000 out of that, and then he jumped on their motorbikes and off and away, He was spending a lot of money. He was using coke. He still had bills to pay. He was living in a hotel and womanising. He was a robber. He got a buzz out of it, couldn't stop doing it.
The main Knightsbridge trial was long and eventful. It took years to track certain gang members around the world. David Poole received 16 years for robbery. Peter O'Donoghue 11. Israel Pincus got 10 years for receiving stolen goods. As for the 2 informants, Stephen Mann received 5 years, whilst the centre owner, Parvez Latif, got 18 years. Ringleader Valerio Viccei received 22 years for robbery and possessing a firearm. Eric Rubin fled to Israel but was eventually extradited and given 12 years in 1991. Despite Stephen Mann's allegations, Viccei's father was never charged. Although Viccei received a lengthy sentence, it did nothing to calm his cocky attitude.
He was reading the Guinness Book of Records, waiting for the jury to come back, just boning up on where he stood as far as the biggest heist was. Amazing.
He liked to be known as the one that had done it. He wasn't ashamed of the fact. He was very proud of the fact that he was an Italian who'd come across and done the biggest robbery of all time.
What I think is dangerous with someone like Viccei is to glorify him, is to talk about him as a high, I use the expression highwayman, and I think it would be very dangerous to turn him into some sort of cult figure or a sort of mythical figure. He was a bank robber, or a robber certainly, an armed robber, quite good at what he did, ruthless, and he could well have killed people if he'd had to. And I think one should always bear that in mind when you see the gold chain and the big smile in the pictures.
With the main culprit and his accomplices in prison, the police investigation was a success. But of the estimated £40 million worth of goods stolen, only a fraction was ever recovered.
9 people are being questioned by police in London investigating last month's raid
on safe deposit boxes in Knightsbridge. They also say they found several £1 million worth of cash, silver and jewellery.
We know what we recovered, about £10 million worth of property.
30 of the owners never went to the police, so nobody has any idea what was in those boxes.
We also know that there was 24 to 26 kilos of scrap gold that went into Hatton Garden and was melted down. Now, that scrap gold consisted of the bangles and chains and so on that the original jewellery had been in.
It was a suggestion that, in fact, Viccei and his friends had robbed other members of the underworld. So it's quite possible that the Knightsbridge safe deposit boxes also held some of the secrets of the underworld as well.
As for the rest of the loot...
He never did say what had happened to it. He said it was in a safe place, but that was it. He was obviously not going to divulge where it was.
Despite being locked up in prison, Viccei never stopped trying to make a name for himself.
He asked if he could write a book about his actual robbery.
Most criminals would not write books. I mean, it's their business, it's their livelihood. You don't give away your trade secrets to the other side. Viccei couldn't care less.
I said to him, well, you know, why the Knightsbridge job? And he said, well, he wanted to be known as the one who'd done the biggest robbery in history. And that was his main motivation for it. The money obviously was part of it, but his main kick in life was that he was going to be the #1 criminal in the world.
After writing a book on his crimes while in prison, Viccei was eventually sent back to Italy in 1992 to serve the remainder of his sentence. 8 years later, his life of crime came to an untimely end. He was just 45 years old.
And then, of course, eventually ended up in Pescara, and then he was getting parole, weekend leave, and of course then he couldn't leave it alone. He got involved with another couple of guys in a car in the mountains up near where he was living at the time.
2 Italian traffic policemen came up, saw the car, were suspicious and stopped them. There was an exchange of gunfire. Viccei seriously wounded one of the policemen and then walked over to kill him. And the policeman shot him back, got there first with a submachine gun and hit him 12 times. Why not just run? Why not just walk away? Why not escape? But to go over and just calmly plan to shoot him is quite cold-blooded, quite... Again, it's all part of this sort of image that he cultivated. If Viccei hadn't decided to be so cold-blooded and come over and kill the policeman, he could easily have got away and survived that. The twist for Viccei is here's the man who committed one of the world's biggest robberies, and certainly one of the biggest robberies ever committed in Britain, dies at the hands of a wounded policeman in the Italian countryside, hardly recognised or known. In fact, after he was killed, it took the police some time to work out who he was, which must have really galled him.
And that was the end of him. Bye-bye, Valerio.